Alright, so normally I've been pretty good about doing these cold opens, but I don't really have one today. So all I'm going to say is it's a new episode of a brand new series. Let's get into it. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and as you heard at the top, this is the first video in a brand new series that I'm calling Retro Rewind. Basically, the purpose of this series is mainly going to be centered around me, but I'm sure Jay and Jenna might throw some videos in there too, but for the most part it'll be me. And it'll center around me reading basically some of the big events in comic history because, as you've probably heard me say, I'm a fairly new comic reader. I started reading around 2015. So a lot of your bigger events that most people know happened before I started reading comics. And since I've gotten into reading, I've mainly just been fascinated, of course, with a lot of the stuff that continuously comes out new. But now it's like I really need to go back and read some of these other stories to understand more about what I'm reading now. So yeah, that's a lot of redundancy. So with that said, I was not really sure what event to start out with. And I was thinking about it hard, and then finally Jay and Jenna just, they put the book down in front of me and said, "Here, you read this." And I'd probably still be stumbling and never debut this series if they hadn't done that. So with that said, I'm here to talk to you guys about Civil War. Not really sure how I'm going to format this. Y'all know how my rapids usually go, my rapid reviews, but obviously I will do a review, but also try to talk about a few other things that I've learned along the way, I guess, just to throw that in there. So with that said, yeah. So now, having read Civil War, I 100% understand why people who went and saw the movie flat out say it is nothing like the book at all. For anybody who maybe has not read it and you're like me, the book is written by Mark Millar, who is an amazing writer. He's done some of the best stories in comic history, so just be sure to look him up. Pencils by Steve McNiven. Inks by Dexter Vines, Mark Morales, Steve McNiven, John Dell, and Tim Townsend. Colors by Maury Hallowell, and letters by Chris Iliopoulos. If I butchered any of those names, please let me know so I can make sure I get them right moving forward. So with that said, what did I learn? The first thing is probably that the Avengers were a bigger deal than I really thought. Yes, I mainly know about the Avengers through the MCU. I know very little about them actually having read Marvel Comics. Yes, I have read some Marvel, but it's mainly centered around Deadpool, Daredevil primarily for the most part. So maybe one or two issues of something like an X-Men, or Nova was another big character that I was really into, but I hadn't really touched too many of the individual Avengers characters and Avengers comics. So with that said, I really didn't grasp that they really truly are like the Justice League is to DC. So yeah, seeing the whole war basically revolve around one decision. And I will say that is a bit of a similarity to the beginning of the Civil War movie and this, where it is casualties that should never have happened because of superheroes. Except in the movie it was, basically an honest mistake with the Avengers, versus this one was a bunch of idiots trying to make a TV show, and they get in over their heads with the villains they're fighting, and one of them blows up and then basically kills, God, I can't remember the amount, but a bunch of children and adults in a small town. So this prompts everybody to want to do the Registration Act. And of course, just like the movie where they did get this right again, you have Iron Man on one side and Captain America on the other. I will say this. Seeing and reading about Cap, I've always been fascinated by Captain America, but basically beyond the movies, I don't actually know much about him. You know, I didn't really watch the Avengers cartoons either as much because they just weren't quite as intriguing as all the Spider-Man stuff was. And of course, the 90s X-Men cartoon, which is probably the be-all, end-all of all Marvel animated stuff for me. So to see how Cap was and how respected he is, and that's literally something that just holds true with no matter who is dealing with him, whether it's Avengers, whether it's even, you know, mutants, the Fantastic Four, everybody has a lot of respect for him. Conversely, you have Tony, who is definitely exactly as he's portrayed. I remember the old Iron Man cartoon from about the 90s as well, plus, of course, how Robert Downey Jr. plays him, but you realize that is actually pretty spot on for the character, as far as he is a party boy. He does have a bit of an reputation, so I get it, but yeah, so of course now we're in the registrations and you see people kind of dividing down the middle. Cap has his side with Goliath and a few others. You have Tony with Hank Pym, who I really wish that Ant-Man in the MCU was Hank Pym and not Scott Lang, but that's neither here nor there. But Hank Pym and, of course, Reed Richards. And I will touch on Reed Richards here in a little bit. But to see the genius of those three men all working together is pretty freaking cool. The one thing that I will say is I didn't know until reading this, of course, that Black Panther, for the most part, is kind of out of the conflict versus before he was, you know, they were trying to figure out a few things on that end, it seemed like, in Civil War. So he was a bigger character, I think, in the movie than maybe he was here, but his importance never sways. Knowing that Doctor Strange, you know, basically it was pretty much almost all of the Marvel Universe was there. What I was really surprised about was that the X-Men were actually very not in this. And I really thought they would be, given how the X-Men have been treated, how mutants in general have been treated in the Marvel Universe, at least to my knowledge. So I thought for sure that they would be in this a little bit more than maybe just see Wolverine here and there and fighting on Cap's side mainly, but they were not. And so that, as I was reading, I kept waiting to see if maybe they would pop in a little more, but no, they honestly didn't, and just that kind of surprised me reading everything. So yeah, with that said, we're going through the story. Of course, one of the big things is they get Spider-Man on their side to sign the Registration Act. He comes out, takes off his mask, reveals who he is. And to me, that was one of the funniest parts of the book, because you could see Jameson just fall over in his chair and you see the papers go up, and I could see that whole thing in my head. And I think Jay was in the room. He was working that day, and I'm just reading. I started laughing out loud. He's looking at me, and I'm just like, sorry, just Spider-Man revealed who he was, and I told him, I was like, and Jameson fell out, and I said I can see the whole thing in my head, and I'm just dying laughing. But yeah, so we get there, and now it's basically become S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Iron Man Avengers are basically trying to get crime down, and it's working in some ways, to the point that they realize that most of the actual fighting that they're doing is with Captain America's Secret Avengers. That is basically how they were referring to him. So this kind of all comes to a head in the first kind of big battle where they introduce Ragnarok. And I was actually fooled at first, because Jay has mentioned what Ragnarok actually was, because, you know, Thor Ragnarok, the movie, he was excited thinking that it was going to be Ragnarok, and he was explaining to me what it was and whatnot. So when this Thor pops up, I didn't know that Thor was dead actually at this point, because again, hadn't really read much Marvel comics. When he shows up, I'm like, oh wow, Thor is way more of a bad MFer than I thought he was, because he is destroying people left and right. Well, then when he kind of starts getting a little angrier and a little more violent, I was like, oh, that's Ragnarok, and I knew it immediately. So it clicked in my head at least. So it wasn't one of those I was side swiped by. Oh my God! Wait, that's a robot. So yeah, and he just blows a hole through Goliath, and that pretty much stuns everybody on both sides. One thing I will definitely say about this book is, compared to, again, the movies and most of my experience with Marvel, I loved the grit. I loved the in-your-face action that they had. They had a good amount of storytelling, but when it was time to do action, they really, really did a great job art-wise of making you feel what was on the page. Heavy hits, big punches, that, Goliath's death and all that. Just the power of Ragnarok being there was, you could see that presence on the page. And to be perfectly honest, outside of maybe Superman, that's the first time where I've read a comic and just been like, wow. You can just feel how awesome the power of someone is and the scope of this fight. So I basically had only intended to read a couple of issues, and then just kind of each day until I was done, and then it was going to be time to do the review. Nah, once that big thing with Goliath at the end of this fight hit, I knew right then and there that I was going to read the entire thing that day. So yeah, and I did. It took me probably about an hour and a half. So of course you kind of move along, and you realize with a few things that the Ragnarok thing was something that was, for the most part, kept a secret from quite a few people. Spider-Man. Most of the people on Iron Man's side didn't know, outside of Iron Man, Hank, and Reed. And you could see how much it impacts small and larger, characters alike. You see how it basically deters Spider-Man. You can see how it causes Sue to basically just leave Reed for now. And a lot of that started because Reed was very much, as I kind of expected him to be. He's a genius, but he is very much into his work, and he seems like he can come off as cold and not caring, but even though he's the exact opposite. But he was so buried in his work, and then that secret just basically drove Sue out of that side. And you see just this whole thing of changing sides. Even some people from Cap's side are like, nah, man. And so they do this swap. And then they finally figure out where they're putting everybody that they do capture at, as far as this prison that everyone has been talking about, called, Facility 42 or something like that. I know it involved the number 42. And so they're going to hatch this big plan to get in there because it's in the negative zone, and they finally figured out a way to get in through the Rikers Island entrance because they haven't opened up the other gateways yet. Because the ultimate plan for Tony's side was they were going to do, I don't really remember what he's called, I'm just going to call it the Avenger Initiative, where they were basically going to do the 50 state thing. They were going to have a team in every state, and they were going to have ways to put criminals, and especially supervillains, in the negative zone. So they were going to have bridges everywhere. But for now, they just had the one on Rikers Island, because basically this entire storyline takes place in New York, except for a brief bit over in, I think it's Arizona, which is where kind of the big twist happens. And I kind of thought that was what was going on when they had someone come up and they were like, hey, Hank, can you come with us? We think we fed so-and-so the wrong thing, and his skin's turning the wrong color. And you see him kind of go off, and I'm like, okay. So, yeah, so that comes up and feeds into this. One of the coolest things that I think I saw, because it was the one thing from Civil War that Jay had told me about, and I really hadn't got to see it, is when Punisher kind of came about. And they were trying to get this plan together to do everything, and Punisher's like, you really can't get in this facility without me. Well, of course, at this point, too, they've got the Thunderbolts involved on Iron Man's side, which is a group of villains, to try and help them win this. And you see some of the villains realizing that they're just as vulnerable as heroes are in this, in terms of, being captured and et cetera, et cetera. So when a couple of them try to come and join, Punisher just blasts them. Just no mercy, pulls out a couple of machine guns and just blasts him into oblivion. And you see Cap lose his mind, and he beats the ever-living heck out of Punisher. And you see people like, come on, fight back. And everybody's like, come on, why won't he fight back? And you finally see Punisher say, no, not Cap. And finally done with him, and he just throws him out. And everybody keeps asking, was like, why wouldn't he throw a punch? And he said, because it's Captain America. For Punisher, that was the reason he joined the army, and he has so much respect for Captain America that he was not going to fight back. So that for me was kind of cool to see. So I was like, really? Punisher kind of doing that to Cap? Just kind of bowing? Yeah. So, okay, kudos. That was another one of those things where you realize the amount of importance of some of these bigger characters. It was really cool to see. So let's fast forward. We get into the battle with the Negative Zone. They think it's an ambush from Iron Man's side, and they're outnumbered. This is when the whole plot turn takes place, and one of the guys on Captain America's team, who's basically a shapeshifter, so much so though that he can replicate, I think, DNA and fingerprints, is Hank Pym. And they're like, oh my god, if he can do, if he's able to fool the scanners and whatnot, he's had all the access that Hank's had. And boom, all the gates open, and everybody from the other side, on Captain America's side, is there, and boom, this big epic battle keeps going. And finally, I guess, the battle's going, and they jump a portal because of Cloak into downtown New York. And basically, at this point, it ends on kind of a cool note. You see Captain America kind of realize the gravity of what's going on. And that he was basically wrong, so to speak, and just says, stand down. And everybody's like, what? Wait, no. And he's like, yeah. He walks up, puts his hands out, lets him get cuffed, and that's the end of this version of Civil War. I know that's kind of a brief outline and run through the whole thing, but I have so much to share outside of the storyline itself that, I wasn't really sure how to do this, so forgive me. These will get better, I'm sure, format-wise. So yeah. So like I said, there's several things I did get to learn about the Marvel Universe. I mentioned the thing about Reed Richards. I knew the Fantastic Four were a big thing in the Marvel Universe. Over the time of the MCU, people kept kind of saying that the fact that Reed wasn't there, there was a lot that could have been added in just by having the Fantastic Four and him, and now I get it. I understand how important the Fantastic Four, I understand how important Reed Richards' genius is to everything in this universe, so I get it now. And I am very much inspired to go check out some Fantastic Four storylines. So if you guys know some big trades for Fantastic Four that I should go get and read and review for the Retro Rewind, let me know down in the comments, because I'm all in. I'm all in on wanting to check out more Marvel. I have always leaned more towards DC comic wise, and I still kind of do in some ways, but now I really, really want to check out some more stuff from Marvel's history, and a lot more of the big events. As a kid, I was always fascinated by the Dark Phoenix saga, so definitely going to check that out. Got the Infinity Gauntlet, a few more X-Men things. There's Siege, Secret Invasion, just, all this stuff. This is definitely stuff that I am more excited now than I was before reading Civil War to check out. So yeah, as far as the book overall, I guess this is one of the few books I've read where the drawing was actually done in pencils. I guess I'm so used to newer stuff with it being probably done on a tablet or electronically of some kind. So to see how inks and pencils and the layers of that come out was truly, truly awesome. This book was, like I said, I could feel the battles, and I guess just something about the art style of this entire team and whatnot just really caught my eye, and it was a beautiful book. I mean, as much as there was some blood and great, detail within a lot of the gore that was there, it was truly amazing experience overall to see that world and just see how they did. I mean, New York looked pretty dang good, I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, overall this book for me, 10 out of 10. If you're like me and fairly new to comics, 100% you need to read this so that you can understand a little bit of the Marvel Universe and why the Avengers and the characters that have been portrayed so far in the MCU on film are as important as they are. Now, the flip side of all this is there are some people that, like I said, I was really surprised at the lack of the X-Men. But again, not knowing where the universe kind of was at this point, like I saw no Xavier, so I don't know if he was dead, and this and that. So I wasn't really sure. But again, I think one of the other things that fascinated me too was, of course, the Watcher was there, and he cannot interfere in just the natural course of things. But seeing how Doctor Strange basically kind of did the same thing and just sat there and meditated was a little surprising, but also adds to the mystique of Doctor Strange. He's always been a fascinating character for me in general, and I really know almost next to nothing about him. But again, like I said, I'm getting now how important or maybe big and powerful he might actually really be. Of course, it was cool to see Daredevil in there. I understand Daredevil is not necessarily the biggest of characters, but his role and the things he said had impact. Daredevil was my favorite character, by the way, in all of Marvel, for anybody who doesn't know. So it was just cool for me to see him, and the silver dollar thing that he said to him was actually kind of cool. So yeah, that's basically my take on Civil War. I know it was a little brief and kind of jumping around, but like I said, I'll figure out the structure for these videos, going down the road. It's just one of those, I kind of wanted to just play this one out, see how it did, so that, when next month's video comes out, I can make adjustments to it and make it better. But yeah, so I plan on doing a Retro Rewind at least once a month. So be ready for the one that's coming in August. I already had that particular book picked out. I'm definitely going to plan to read it, get it filmed, and it'll come probably about mid-August. I'll try to keep the timeline kind of similar and somewhere around there. But yeah, I'm going to try to get out a list and read all these books all the way through Christmas. Maybe try to throw in like something Halloween themed for October and something Christmas themed for December. But yeah, there's a lot of big stories from a lot of companies. It's not going to be just Marvel and DC. You'll see some Valiant here, Dynamite, Boom Studios. They all have some really big stuff to check out. It's not going to be just these big comic lore stories that, of course, we all know and love. I will hit those. You will see a lot of Marvel and DC in here for sure. But yeah, those other companies, like for instance with Valiant, Divinity is going to be something that you will see at some point on here. I just won't tell you when. But there's 3 volumes of that, so I will definitely dedicate a video to each volume and just see where it goes. As always, if you liked what you saw, please let me know down in the comments. Hit the thumbs up button and be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you know anytime we upload a new video. And as always, you guys please stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you next time. Later, everyone.